delighted to be here. Very nice to meet you, sir. Honorable Minister. Dear Ambassador. The best President of the General Assembly ever. And it's true. There is somewhere the head of the Economic Commission for Africa. And this is my representative. The head of the Sahel Development Project. And these are members of my team. Welcome to Nigeria. Head of the political union. Special prize for allez.
Guterres, Republic of Nigeria. Here is first behind closed doors.
Humanitarian assistance from does it affect any other humanitarian assistance from the United Nations? Other nations, including Africa, like
Nigeria's request for a permanent cease and pushback by the terrorists themselves and regional governments in tackling terrorism.
Nations, it did not affect.
Welcome to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, on his maiden visit to Nigeria. The importance of this visit cannot be lost on anyone in this country, indeed on the entire African continent. Coming at a time when the entire global attention is focused on the unfortunate situation in Ukraine, we in this region are feeling already that the world is forgetting about us. There can be no better assurance that the world is with us as we confront extremist terrorist organizations, hunger, and the enormous problems of dealing with millions of displaced people than this important visit. This visit is not therefore just a visit, but a meeting of minds and aspirations on what must be done to assist our country and the troubled sub-region. Thank you very much, and you are welcome.
Welcome. And I'm profoundly grateful to the government of Nigeria and to all those who helped make this visit possible at the end of the period linked to the Eid, and for allowing me to share in this special time. This is a visit of solidarity with all Nigerians, but particularly with the victims of terrorism that I also met, that I yesterday met in Borno. I'd also hope that it will be part of my annual solidarity visit for Ramadan, in which I would join the fast. For the last 2 years, COVID-19 has prevented me from carrying on this annual tradition, which dates back to my time as High Commissioner of Refugees and now as Secretary General. And this year, as you know, I was forced to postpone my trip to Nigeria to undertake an urgent mission to Ukraine and the Russian Federation to seek an end to the conflict and the immense suffering it has caused. But Ramadan's timeless message of renewal and hope is one that I carried in my heart throughout my mission. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to visit Borno State. And I must confess, I arrived in Borno with the impression caused by so many years in which I was hearing stories about how dramatic the situation was, how terrible the suffering of the people, how impossible to control the terrorist activities, a sense of despair. But the Borno I met yesterday was the Borno of hope. And I saw an enlightened policy aiming not only at defeating militarily the terrorists, but at addressing the root causes of terrorism. I saw the governor committed to reestablish the confidence between the people and the government, committed to provide the people in their different villages around the state the capacity to protect themselves, committed to create conditions for the return of the displaced, but also for the reintegration of those that have abandoned Boko Haram, that have finally discovered that terrorism is a crime against humanity and a crime against God's will, and that now needs support to reintegrate in the society. And that support I could witness in the visits I made. That's why yesterday I appealed strongly to the international community to fully support what is being done in Borno State, to make sure that the hope that I saw can be transformed into a reality of peace and prosperity for everybody. And I believe Nigeria and its people have a big role to play in shaping solutions to the global crisis engulfing our world. Nigeria is a pillar of continental and global cooperation and a steadfast part of the United Nations. From its vital support for peacekeeping, to its leadership in fighting for fairness for developing countries, to being the home country of my dear friend, United Nations Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed. Above all, Nigeria is a country where Africa's promise and potential can come to vivid life. I saw this firsthand in my meetings today with women and young people whose vision and commitment were deeply inspiring. I also met with religious and cultural leaders representing Nigeria's beating multi-ethnic heart, and business leaders pushing Nigeria's economy forward. But I also went to see firsthand some of the enormous challenges facing this country. Violence continues to cast a shadow of death over so many Nigerians and has sparked a crisis of displacement across the country and the neighborhood. But yesterday, I came out of Borno with the sense that Nigeria is able to defeat this threat. We are very active in support of the humanitarian efforts of the Nigerian government. And that is why we have called for an additional $351 million as part of the overall $1.1 billion for the humanitarian response plan for Nigeria. But despite all they have seen and endured, the people I met remain hopeful and committed to returning to their communities and resuming their lives. To that end, I welcome the establishment of the Presidential Committee on the Repatriation, Return and Resettlement of Displaced Persons in the Northeast. This spirit of hope amidst hardship and solidarity in struggle was also at the center of my discussions with His Excellency the President today. We discussed the importance of laying the groundwork to ensure peaceful and democratic elections next year and the full participation of Nigeria's women and young people in all areas. And we also discussed the government's measures to address security challenges across the countries. I want to extend my deepest condolences to the victims of the appalling attacks in the Plateau State 2.5 weeks ago. It's a tragic reminder of terrorism's scourge across West Africa and the Sahel. And another reason why the United Nations is committing to supporting national and regional efforts to combat terrorism, violent extremism, organized crimes and their root causes, such as poverty, exclusion, and food insecurity. And this includes the UN's integrated strategy for the Sahel. I thanked President Buhari for his unwavering support of the multinational Joint Task Force and the Lake Chad Basin Commission. And we also discussed the other challenges that, of course, Nigeria is facing today. Nigeria was, like all African countries, victim of the unequal recovery from COVID-19. Despite the government's ambitious goal to vaccinate 40% of the population by the end of last year, only about 4% have been vaccinated so far. I have consistently sounded the alarm and called on wealthier countries and pharmaceutical companies to step up their donations and to invest in local vaccine production, supporting our fight to counter vaccine misinformation and vaccine injustice. With many competing health priorities in Nigeria, I do believe that vaccinations must be integrated with all other vital vaccinations and interventions. Then Nigeria is feeling the effects of a warming planet, from droughts, floods, rising temperatures, to crucial ecosystems like Lake Chad at risk of drying up and disappearing altogether. Holding global warming to the necessary 1.5 degrees means cutting global emissions by 45% this decade. But present national determined contributions worldwide put us on track to a 14% rise in emissions. This is a disaster in the making for all countries, including Nigeria, which is already in the danger zone of the high climate vulnerability. Developing countries need a massive boost in technical and financial support to spark a just transition to renewable energy and green jobs. And they also need to build resilience against the impacts already battering them. This includes scaled-up support for the massive Great Green Wall initiative to keep desertification in check and create decent jobs and thriving regional economic corridors that benefit all people. All development banks and the private sector must urgently work with governments to design and deliver bankable projects. We need to see 50% of climate finance going to adaptation and reformed eligibility systems so vulnerable nations can access it. And developed countries must now deliver on their $100 billion climate finance commitments to developing countries this year. I've asked the World Meteorological Organization to develop an action plan to ensure that every person on Earth is protected by early warning systems within 5 years. 1/3 of the world's people are unprotected by early warning systems, including 60% of Africans. We must change this. And then there is the challenge of the lack of access to resources. This prevents developing countries from investing in job creation, expanded social protection, food security, universal health care, quality education, and digital connectivity. I've been calling for an effective fight around the world against tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit financial flows that spread corruption and divert vital resources from the needy. The success of Nigeria's economic sustainability plan and its efforts to take advantage of the African continental free trade area while overcoming inflation and investing in the sustainable development goals all depend on increased access to external resources and the effective mobilization of national ones. At the same time, our analysis indicates that the war in Ukraine is only making things worse, setting in motion a three-dimensional crisis that is devastating global food, energy, and financial systems for the developing countries. That is why, in the earliest days of this war, I established the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance, involving all UN agencies and international financial institutions. The steering committee is chaired by the Deputy Secretary General that you know very well, Amina Mohamed. And the group has developed concrete recommendations in 3 areas. 1, we need to ensure a steady flow of food and energy through open markets by lifting all unnecessary export restrictions, directing surpluses and reserves to those in need, and keeping a lid on food prices to calm our market volatility. But let me be clear, there is really no true solution to the problem of global food security without bringing back the agricultural production of Ukraine and the food and fertilizer production of Russia and Belarus into world markets despite the war. And I'm determined to do everything to facilitate the dialogue that can help achieve this objective. 2, on energy, countries must resist hoarding and release strategic stockpiles and additional reserves to countries in need while accelerating the deployment of renewable energy. And 3, international financial institutions need to urgently increase liquidity and fiscal space and improve existing debt relief mechanisms so governments can not only avoid default, but they can invest in their people, especially in universal social protection at this moment of rising prices. The United Nations presented concrete proposals during the spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, ranging from the mobilization of the various funds and instruments that already exist but are not sufficiently implemented, to much stronger use and redistribution of special drawing rights, as well as effective debt relief measures. I've said several times that we need the reform of the global financial system. It was designed by the rich for the rich. But as we face a situation that requires urgent action, we must make greater use of all available mechanisms for the benefit of developing countries, including middle-income countries, especially in Africa. We need to put recovery within reach for all countries and all peoples equally. And finally, I want to thank the government and people of Nigeria for not only hosting the United Nations, but for rebuilding and reopening the United Nations House in Abuja in 2019, following the terrorist attacks in 2011. It was a very generous and a very effective, and I would say beautiful, contribution, as the building is indeed remarkable. Just as Nigeria stood with the United Nations stands in solidarity with Nigeria across the board. We look forward to strengthening our partnership and advancing peace, security and development across the country, the region and the world. Mr. President, thank you very much. Our action in Ukraine, but we have not decreased our action in all other parts of the world. And my appeal is for those that support financially the United Nations not to divert funds from other humanitarian and development forms of cooperation to the Ukraine crisis, but to put additional contributions for that crisis, not undermining the efforts in humanitarian and development cooperation that are taking place all around the world. An essential element of the reform of the United Nations. Kofi Annan, an African Secretary General, said that there will be no true and no complete reform of the United Nations without the reform of the Security Council. Now, Africa is a double victim of colonialism. First, it was victim of colonialism in itself, and second, because most of the institutions were created when African countries were not yet independent, Africa is underrepresented in most of the international institutions. And one of the things that I believe has now a general consensus is that Africa is underrepresented in the United Nations Security Council. Obviously, this is a matter for member states to deal with, not for the Secretary General. I have no authority on that. But I consider that there is a growing consensus of the need to increase Africa presence. And it is entirely fair to recognize that there should be a permanent member of the Security Council from the African continent. Don't ask me now to discuss who should be, because the African Union has been very clear to say we want a seat, but has not said anything about who should occupy. Of course, Nigeria is the country with the largest population, the largest economy, so your position is, of course, entirely understandable, but don't ask the Secretary General to promise what I cannot give. The other question about... no, it is simple. I saw it in Borno. If you fight terrorism just militarily, the terrorists will strike back. But if you fight terrorism militarily and address the root causes of terrorism, terrorism will no longer have a chance to persist. I think that it was Mao Zedong that said that his insurrection should move like a fish in water. I mean, so if the communities are able to defend themselves, and if they trust the regional government institutions, and if there are programs to guarantee a full reintegration of ex-terrorists and to guarantee that victims have a future, then I think we can defeat terrorism.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the best. Thank you very much for putting us on the map of the world again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.